designing hands-on in services and activities to capture the team's attention and to keep them engaged is crucial. But it takes a team. It takes multiple people across the organization to really make an effect.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
All right, Clean Freaks, welcome back to the Beyond Clean podcast, season 28. I'm your host, Bobby Parker, and today's episode is all about institutional knowledge, or I believe tribal knowledge is what we're talking about today, how it is that we're supposed to function in the department when one tech has all of the knowledge in their brain because they've been here for so long. We've got a lot of different types of guests that come on this show. We bring industry experts, we brought vendors, we've brought consultants, we've brought brand new technicians from all different walks of life. But today we're bringing a conversation that came up with between Hank and an SBD professional out there, and thought it was inspiring enough to want to bring that conversation live here on the show. So first of all, Hank, welcome back to the studio. Glad that you're joining me today. Could you give us a teaser about this conversation we're going to be picking up live here on the show?
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. We have said it for multiple seasons, I think from the very beginning of the show, the best way to end up, whether you're wanting to or not, to end up as a guest on the Beyond Clean podcast is to get active out there on LinkedIn, either be posting content, asking questions, even hit us in our inbox. And so Angela and I had been having a discussion in the background on LinkedIn on a lot of the things that she was experiencing and seeing out there, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I said, you know what? That would make a great conversation to bring to this season of the podcast. So yeah, super excited to talk to her today.
Yeah, me as well. I've got a little bit of a peek into where we're headed with the conversation, but certainly a ubiquitous issue. Every department struggling with that tribal knowledge. So should be a really interesting one. We will be joining Angela in studio right after this.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
And joining us now in studio is Angela Russell, sterile processing professional out in the Dallas, Texas. Angela, we've been looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really important topic, and Hank and I know that you've got a lot of value to bring to this conversation based on our previous calls, and so we're excited to dive into it. But before we do, Angela, take just a moment to let the audience get to know you. What's your background in sterile processing been like, and why is this such an important topic to you?
Absolutely. Obviously, my name is Angela Russell. I'm a Texas native. I have about 12 years experience in sterile processing. I started out at a trauma level 1 hospital here in Dallas, where I absorbed as much information as possible. That experience gave me exposure to many different situations in a fast-paced environment that I believe was crucial to my initial growth. I took what I learned there and branched out into various roles with another organization where I accepted a manager position. After 9 years at that organization, I decided to just take a step back to focus on personal growth and education to continue to propel myself forward. I am currently CRCST, CIS, CER, and CHL certified. I'm working on the CCI Beyond Clean Sterile Processing Foundations of Quality Management Systems micro-credential. And I will now be pursuing Six Sigma certification.
Oh, dang. You're going after it. I love to hear that.
Absolutely.
That's great. And yeah, thanks for a shout out on the micro-credential. Congrats on the Golden Crown on all of your certifications. That's
Thank
quite an
you.
accomplishment. Yeah, for sure. That story of starting out in a really busy level 1 trauma center and then moving into a different facility, did that change your perspective at all when you stepped into a different facility that maybe wasn't quite as crazy?
It definitely did. I was able to see, the very fast-paced environment with just a multitude of situations going on, to a very slower, not very slower, but a slower environment where there's not so much going on. So I was able to really hone in on some things that I really wasn't able to focus on at the fast-paced environment. So I think having both experiences really made a difference.
Yeah, I guess either way you do it, there are definitely some pros and cons. But I had a very similar story starting out in a facility that did, 80 cases on a busy day, tons and tons of total joints. Hank, you know what I'm talking about. You were there with me. The department I went to afterwards was like 14 FTEs, which was, a lot smaller, obviously. And so the technicians, when they get in Decontam, would be freaking out if there were 2 case carts in there. And
Oh my.
I was just chuckling to myself. It's like, man, you'd never survive at that other place. But
Yeah,
but it
absolutely.
it does open our eyes up a little bit to see those types of things that we just brushed off as we don't have time to do this at the busy facility, and they take really seriously at some of those smaller facilities. And you
Absolutely.
realize, maybe I was taking some shortcuts I didn't know about. So really valuable for kind of building out that knowledge base going from facility to facility. That's actually a pretty decent segue for us, Angela, as we're talking about tribal knowledge today, because we get in this mode of depending upon technicians who've built up a knowledge base. Maybe they're the employee who's been with us for forever, or they're, the ones who came from the busy facility and they're working in the smaller one today. But that kind of concentration of knowledge in one employee can create some real problems. So why don't you give us an introduction to this idea of tribal knowledge and what kind of problems it can have in the sterile processing department?
Absolutely. So I have seen this in several different scenarios. Each scenario, it creates gaps in productivity to include, bottlenecking in specific areas, and also leads to quality deficiencies. One example that I can give as it relates to the decontamination process is TEE probes. So if you have one technician that truly knows and understands each step in cleaning the TEE probes and decontam, over time he also gains that speed and becomes that go-to technician for processing TEE probes. That being said, when he is not there, something happens, he's on vacation, he has to go on FMLA, now you have other technicians that have to step in to cover that assignment. And while he was mastering his skill in processing TEE probes, your other technicians have now lost their skills. So I think it's important to have them brush up on their skills so that they can be processed in a safe and effective manner.
Now, I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here right at the outset of our call, Angela.
I figured you were going there, Bobby.
That's right. Well, we talk a lot about this specialization topic, and it's important in just about every department that you step into, kind of whether or not we're going to do cross training to have everybody do everything, or we're going to create specialists. And, Hank's the guy who wraps all the loaners, and he gets really good at it. Hank, you know where I'm going with this. Tom was a legend at wrapping those loaners. And when Tom was on vacation on ortho night, you felt it because nobody could do it like Tom could do it. So I bet there was a lot of value in having that technician reprocess the TEE probes, because you get a lot of efficiency gains at it. Maybe was the one who could do it with the best quality as well. And so is there a balance to be had in this conversation around tribal knowledge and specialization? Or do you think, cross training is always the best solution every department, every time?
So I definitely believe that having the right people in the right place at the right time during peak processing hours is important. But I also believe that it is essential to cross train your team because, again, that technician is not always going to be there.
Yeah, Bobby, I think it was Megan on one of our teams who used the phrase getting your aces in their places on those peak processing nights. Because you're right, that's a little bit of a soft touch when it comes to leadership of the balance that Bobby was kind of discussing. Do we just treat everyone like we're playing T-ball and there's no one that's better than anyone. You're all going to play all positions. And if we lose, we lose, but at least everybody got to be pitcher tonight. Or are we going to say, hey, we've got to get this stuff done, and we got to get it done in a qualitative fashion, even if that means that, Johnny may have not been able to wrap loaners or do those TE probes in the last couple of weeks, but it's because Susie is back there and she's the expert. But I think you bring up a fantastic point, Angela, like there's risks that go both ways. If you're focusing on that specialization too much and become dependent upon it to the faults, then when they take vacation or when they get out on FMLA and then Johnny's like, I haven't done TE probe in I don't know how long. It's amazing how much you can forget in one long weekend.
Absolutely.
Much less in a couple of weeks if you're just not the one doing it.
For sure. Hank, it kind of reminds me of the conversation that we were having earlier this season around memorizing IFUs, the episode, the IFU memory maze, right? Because skill set is one thing, like reprocessing the TE probes effectively, but then there's also just a knowledge base difference for that, that technician who knows something just because they've been around for 10 years. And the only way they learned it was by being there that long. And that's just the reality of them knowing it. And that creates opportunities with that knowledge for them to, catch mistakes that come through the department and make sure they know which devices get disassembled properly. Like our conversation with Arlene, like there are lots of implications of it. So with this tribal knowledge piece of just, having all the education for being there 10 years, Angela, how do we start moving from having that located in the brain of the person who's been there 10 years to easily accessible so that the technician who's only been here for 3 months can succeed and catch that, that gamma nail tray where the devices need to come apart? Like, how do we start moving away from this dependence on the tech who's just, got all the knowledge in their brain?
So I have a couple of thoughts on that. I think that technology is a big attribute to that. I see a lot of decontamination areas that still don't have, water-resistant computers at the sink where they can access the tracking system with real-time IFUs where, they have that available to them while they're reprocessing that device. A lot of times it still boils down to cost, to getting the necessary technology and equipment that can improve with training and education on our technicians' part.
So beyond technology, Angela, what else have you seen be successful in communicating? Maybe let's just start with the person who knows what other people don't know. Is it always intentional that they don't want to share that knowledge? And if it's not, how do we kind of illustrate that this is a problem? Yeah.
I think that it takes a leader to identify the situation and be able to take a step back and say that this is a problem. It takes an entire leadership and education team to dedicate themselves to the specific situation. And I think by using total quality management systems to educate, implement new processes, and monitor progress to achieve the results that we're looking for, within that, I believe, designing hands-on in-services and activities to capture the team's attention and to keep them engaged is crucial. But it takes a team. It takes multiple people across the organization to really make an effect.
So as you've been traveling to different departments and worked in different departments, do you have any examples of how those quality management systems have been done well? Like kind of contrast the images for us of the department that depends on tribal knowledge to succeed and the examples of where you've seen systems really taking the place of that institutional tribal knowledge and making it readily available.
Ooh, that's a tricky question. So I really feel that just really stepping into the situation and bringing the entire team together, calling out the situation while sharing the knowledge with everyone. In particular, a lot of neuro instruments, we didn't have a lot of technicians that were familiar with them, but physically bringing them to in-services and activities and just sharing the knowledge, but also following up on the quality of those instruments and how improvements have happened over time. So it really starts with small attainable goals with events and reporting and capturing the important data to monitor that.
I love, Angela, how you brought up on a couple of your answers now, the concept of the in-service. That is not a new idea in our space. I think very early on in your sterile processing career, you realize, oh, this is what an in-service is. Like, that's not a phrase that we use really outside of the healthcare environment that I'm aware of. That's kind of a clinical thing. But just because your department does in-services or believes in in-service doesn't mean that it's utilizing in-services in the way that you're describing, specifically to break down this kind of single technician silo knowledge. Only Johnny knows how to take this thing apart and process this in Decon, to now, through an in-service, Johnny or maybe the service line coordinator in the OR comes down and then does the in-service so that the whole team now has exposure to this one point of information that may have before been specialized. Now it's democratized. And that's not the only use of in-services, obviously. They're good reminders, they're good competency checks in general, but it's also a great way to be like, what does Susan know that maybe no one else knows? Now let's plan an in-service around that. And if you do that every single week, again and again and again through the years, you're going to be breaking down every single week another one of these barriers. And all that tribal knowledge slowly starts spreading out to the rest of your team.
Absolutely. But I also believe it's following up after your in-services and sharing of information with each individual employee. Sometimes it takes one-on-one time with each and every employee. There's actually one point in time where I was specifically grabbing those instrument sets and handing them out to people that I knew that didn't know how to process those instruments.
Right. Yeah, that one-on-one call out too, I think is just brilliant, right? And this is probably a takeaway for any educators that are tuning in or any managers that are running their in-services or training. But there is a temptation, the stronger your in-service game is, or the stronger your competency game is, or maybe even the stronger your technology is. Like if it's all in the computer, there's a temptation to trust in that in-service to hit everybody, no matter where they are, no matter what person, no matter what learning style they happen to have, to hit them all the same way. And it's like, we in-serviced this last week, Susan. Why are you still doing this?
Here, your name is on the attendance sheet.
You signed in.
You signed in. You're
front row. Yeah. Well, like to your point, Angela, like there are different learning styles and we're the same way. Like you can tell me something once. I mean, it takes a couple times sometimes for it to really, really sink in and for me to get it. And so, taking that concept down to the individual level and really following up one-on-one and saying, hey, did you have any question about that? Just because she didn't raise her hand and say, yeah, I don't understand that in front of all of her peers, maybe she's not comfortable. There's a million excuses for that. But yeah, like I think that's a really, really important call out here is bring it to beyond the in-service. Start with that as the core, but then you got to go a little bit deeper. I did want to ask, though, going back a little bit to the beginning of this conversation, why you think this kind of thing happens. Why does this knowledge tend to accumulate into individuals? Like, are they doing it themselves? Are we doing it to them? Is it kind of like an age experience thing where like all of us newbies are like, well, Miss Shirley has been here 20 years. And so it's just okay. Like she's going to know things that I don't know. Do you have any pulse on like why we even allow this in our department cultures?
Absolutely. I believe that leaders have the tendency to focus on situations that are a current active issue. So while there is a super tech in place, things are running smoothly and those deficiencies do not demand our immediate attention. And so I think that you don't really notice it until that super tech is not present. And at that time, that's when it starts, resonating in your head that, well, we do need to start cross-training and, this isn't a process that we really want to have.
Yeah, when they're not there and you feel it. I mean, if COVID taught us anything, it's that, any one of us can be missing from work for 2 weeks at just at the drop of a hat, right? So
Absolutely.
that's a reality, but also team turnover, like just the statistics for the turnover in sterile processing, or at least the departments that I've experienced, so much higher than just the standard, even entry level job in healthcare, particularly at the nursing level. Shoot, there was a period, Hank, in the department that we worked in where turnover was, tipping 30%. We were losing a third of our workforce every year. Now, a lot of those losses were for good reasons. They were, either moving up into the OR or advancing their career in some way, or maybe moving out of town, the types of vacancies that you would expect. But whenever you're depending on just one-on-ones or in services alone to educate your team members, but you're losing a third of your team members and replacing them with fresh brains every single year. It may feel like, gosh, we talk about this all the time, but the last time we talked about it was 13 months ago, and a third of your team have only been there less than 12 months. And so it just creates all of these gaps. And so I'm sure that part of fixing this involves systems and information like precepting and training and competencies. What have you seen, Angela, work well on that systems side of thing, that SOP side of things, to make sure that everybody gets the same training, even if they've been here less than 12 months?
Absolutely. I think that it is crucial to have a consistent, in-depth onboarding. It all starts with onboarding, in my opinion, but it needs to be consistent and it needs to be in depth for every single technician that comes into the department, regardless of their background. Because, I've ran into moments where you would assume that a technician would know this information, but in reality, they don't. And I think it takes those onboarding steps to find out where they actually are so that everybody gets the same information. And then I think that it takes a very structured training and educational program that, is really collaborative with the education team to include our infection prevention department. And I think it just really needs to be very consistent and structured throughout every person in the department.
Could you underline for me again the infection prevention involvement in the training? Because I was tracking with you as you were working through that, nodding my head, and kind of my eyebrows went up when you said IP. That's not a connection that I see a lot in kind of the onboarding precepting piece of it. Have you seen IP be involved in a meaningful and useful way in that employee onboarding process?
I have. I've seen where some organizations actually make that introduction in the beginning of who our infection preventionists are, what their role is in this facility, and how they can help you with things that you may not understand. And honestly, it's a checkpoint in the onboarding list.
No, I think that's really cool, making that introduction early on. But, in both directions, I think our IPs ought to be aware of what types of things from a cross-contamination standpoint that our technicians are learning. You mentioned that CCI micro-credential at the beginning of the call around cross-contamination, like that's full of IP knowledge that sterile processing technicians need to know. And so, yeah, what better person to make sure that we're doing that correctly than having a trained IP in that onboarding process? Okay, so we've got good in-servicing. We've got our onboarding and our competencies set up. Who do you think is the best person? And this is maybe a little bit off topic, but who do you think is the best person to do that in-service? A lot of times the pull in our minds to try to get the information out of Susie's head and into everybody else's head is to pair Susie up with the newest employee and just have her train everyone in the department. Is that always the best idea, or what other ways have you seen making sure those preceptors are spreading the right kind of knowledge?
I think that it needs to be a combination of people doing the actual initial in-service. And I would say, the representative from the company, along with our educator, along with incorporating the super tech into the in-service, but making it engaging is, I think, very important for people to actually pay attention and hit those key notes that are crucial to remembering that information.
Angela, we talked a little bit, like we've alluded to these kind of specialist positions. or at least, specialization, I think was the phrase that we threw out. And I know in my career, I've been a part of a couple of departments that have had roles like the database specialist, which would be involved in the tracking system. And then we had a quality assurance specialist who was doing the majority of the QAing. And then, of course, department educator and so forth. We also had OR liaisons that knew a ton about what was happening upstairs in the OR as it pertains to the instrument trays and the doctor preferences. And then, of course, they ended up knowing way more than anybody else in the department about all those nuances, So that's one source of this kind of information that we're talking about to bring it back in. I'm also curious, in your experience on the training, the leadership side of things. So earlier, Angela, we were talking about the different dynamics, about vacation time, weekends, etc. But I want to call out one huge gap, and that's the shift, the kind of tribal knowledge that ends up sticking in the shift. I'll give you a concrete example, maybe that you've seen to give us some feedback on here. You got the morning shift or you got the night shift that does all the Decon tests. They're the one testing the equipment. They do it every morning before they leave. They do it every night before they leave. And so what happens is you got this kind of day shift or this mid shift that literally for the last 10 years of their career, they have not run a TOSI test. They have not read a TOSI test. They have not refilled the chemicals. It's not because they weren't necessarily onboarded correctly or they don't have the competencies checked off on an annual basis. It's because they're on a different shift who has those specific responsibilities. Are we kicking ourselves in the butt when we have these shift-specific responsibilities? Is there a better way to do that you've seen? Is that even a problem? Is that okay? What are your thoughts on that?
So I definitely believe that each shift has their own focus and each shift has their own task that they perform. And I think that it works well at times. But again, when certain people, your key players are not there, it does create an issue. But I do believe that when we have, the right supervisors and the right leaders in the department, when those situations occur, they really should be able to walk our technicians through and just give them a refresher on how to do those things. As long as they have the initial information and onboarding and training, I think that sometimes it's just a quick refresher that's needed.
Right. And it kind of hits you, I think, Bobby, you alluded to this at the very beginning in the move from one department to another. And many times, you don't really realize how little you know about specific parts of the rest of the department or the industry until now you're on a different shift at a different hospital and you're like, oh yeah, somebody else has always been doing that. And I have not had to run a gravity load in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Angela, as we're moving towards the end of the interview here, I want to circle back to your conversation around technology. So when we talked about, the best tools that we have to try to help specifically in decontamination to get the institutional, private, tribal knowledge out of some heads and then standardized across the team, you mentioned there are some departments that don't even have a computer available at their workstation. That is certainly a big step to have a tracking system that can help, deliver information to you. But I'm sure you would agree that you go into the majority of departments that have tracking systems and they're hardly being utilized. They're just a digital count sheet holder. We scan them where they're going, they pull up our count sheet and assembly, and we're not using them for anything else. I'm curious, if you could have your dream implementation in Decontam, you could have whatever posters you want, you could have whatever level of implementation of the tracking system you want to try to ensure your team members did all of decontamination the same way. Could you paint that picture for us?
I can try. I would love to have, at every reprocessing sink, a computer that is equipped with a full functioning tracking system, and knowing that your tracking system is only as good as you use it. So incorporated into your tracking system, do you have all of the available information, including the IFUs? So if I'm a technician and I'm processing something or I receive something I really don't know how to process, or I'm questioning, do I really know what I'm doing? They have the capability of scanning that device and pulling up real-time information on how to process that device specifically. down to the temperature of your enzymatic detergent, the exposure time, contact time of the solution, all available information in front of you so that it takes the question out of it completely.
That's the dream, right? Having that right up there. And then that IFU being presented in a way that's readable. A lot of times in that busy decontamination department, I can think of times where if I had the IFU in front of me, it still wouldn't have helped me because I, assume I know what to do with this instrument and just, carry on going through it. And even if I did add a question, you've got pages and pages to sort through. So getting that information in front of our eyeballs. There's a lot of decisions to be made in decontamination. I just want to underline this tribal knowledge piece one more time for us. A lot of decisions to be made. The case cart comes into decontamination. You open those case cart doors. You got to figure out, does this go through our instrument process or is this going to the hand washing kind of manual cleaning process? And often we don't have an IFU in front of us to decide for us if this can go in the washer or not. How have you seen departments handle that decision well between, do we stage this for the washers or do we stage this for the window?
Well, in the perfect world, you would have a tracking system where you're able to scan that instrument set and it tells you this is not compatible with thermal disinfection. This is not able to be fully immersed. This is a high-level disinfection item. So in the real world and in a tracking system, you can set all of those parameters and information to be available to you. So if you're working without that, it's really pairing your technicians together so that there's a sharing of information along with the in-services, along with activities. We used to do a lot of activities from flashcards to, performing skits in front of the staff to make it fun and engaging where they just really remember the information.
Oh, that's Bobby's favorite thing. He loves skits.
Oh,
you should
I love
see his
him.
face. You can't see his face, but yeah, he's just smiling and nodding. He's a big skit guy.
It's so fun.
Thanks for that,
It's so fun.
For sure. Well, bringing it back to what Angela's point actually was, about pairing people together. That's a solution we hadn't talked through yet. We did talk about, the leadership decisions of putting your aces in places and trying to get through the night. But yeah, there is a real decision process to be made about how you pair technicians up to one another to try to bring up the weaknesses of one by really leaning on the strengths of another and being intentional with that, not just assigning them in the same place, but assigning them in the same place and then giving both of them the expectation that, like, Sally, I want by osmosis some of your skills to leak onto Jill today. So show her everything that you know, and Jill pay attention to what Sally's doing while you're in there. And that can be really valuable, especially for departments that don't have the dream setup of the instrument tracking system. Angela, this has been a great talk. I want to give you the final word here as you cast the vision for departments trying to lever out of the way all of the tribal knowledge and start spreading that through the departments. What would your closing appeal be for departments considering implementing some of the things we talked about today?
I think that everything boils down to teamwork and how we communicate and work together across, the organization as an entire team is important. And the information, it really needs to be received by all and understood by all.
So good. We want every instrument every time, getting patients safe every time. You can't do that if you don't have a team that you can depend on. So yeah, I appreciate that appeal, Angela. Thank you for a great conversation. Again, it's always irritating to be wrapping these conversations right at 30 minutes or so because there's so much more that could be said about this, so many more decisions to be made in Decontam. If you listener out there would like to get in touch with Angela to continue this conversation around tribal knowledge, institutional knowledge, I'd encourage you to connect with her on LinkedIn, or if you have a process of your own that you'd like to share with the Beyond Clean team that you think would be beneficial to the industry, get in touch with us at info@beyondclean.net. That's going to do it for our conversation today. Angela, thanks again for joining the show today.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity.
All right, that was Angela Russell, sterile processing professional out in Dallas, Texas area, talking to us and appealing to us to really embrace standard operating procedures and trying to, as much as we can, not to depend on that institutional knowledge that just tends to get built up over time. Hank, I was remembering throughout that conversation a number of different things that we did in our facility to try to do this because, we were always training new people, always. And so if we could do something to make the learning process simpler, we were trying to do it. So like that conversation around unloading case carts and splitting up which ones go where, we just decided we're going to put different colored labels on the ones that go to the hand wash, just so that the decision's easy. How can we color coordinate decisions so that somebody doesn't accidentally submerge one because they haven't been here longer than 6 months? Those types of things that we can do that make it easy for somebody to know the right thing to do, all the better for learning. And you know this, but this goes way beyond decontamination. It fits well within our season, but this is a really big topic.
Yeah, what's interesting about the Decon context, though, for this convo is that's really the only place in the department that you don't have a lot of eyeballs around you. And so the tribal knowledge piece can really easily expand in ways that are very negative, high risk, and harder to catch than maybe if it's on the clean side or you're at the sterilizer, you're delivering trays or whatever. Like there's a lot of people, a lot of activity. Here, there may only be one or two people and maybe somebody else is on break or lunch. And so you're back there by yourself and now you're making this decision and either you're the one that has a tribal knowledge, which is great, or you're the one who doesn't, which, man, now you're in trouble if you don't have. And we didn't really get to this part of the conversation, but if you don't have the confidence, if you've not been empowered to admit that you don't know, whatever tribal knowledge is out there that you haven't had access to yet, it can be a really bad scenario. And so, yeah, the only call out that I'll add to this, like you said at the end, we only got 30 minutes. We can only talk about so much, but that would be the one thing that I would want to add is it's a big empowerment piece of this conversation that we want to get across to any technicians listening, but then also to preceptors and to managers, empower your people. And tell them, we know you do not know everything. We do not expect you to know everything on day one or day 1001. We're constantly learning, constantly improving. But the only way that you keep yourself and your patients safe is you've got to feel good and confident about saying, I don't know the answer to this. I don't know what I'm doing. Can someone help? Or remind me, even if you just did the in-service last week, that's the hardest thing to admit is, I know you just told me this, but I still don't know what I'm doing. Ask that question.
Yeah, that's really important from a leadership perspective. One other leadership appeal here before we wrap the conversation would be having the answers to those questions get put in a usable document somewhere that can be accessed so that if they do want to ask and that they don't necessarily have to bug the educator every time, because it might be a third shift tech who has the question and they don't want to wake you up at your house in your pajamas. So having it in a document, unfortunately, our SOPs tend to be written like really complex manuals that are highly technical. They're 27 pages long. And they're not usable. So whatever you can do to try to get that usable knowledge of what is the agreed upon answer for how we're going to set up our sinks, or what is the agreed upon list for which instruments cannot be submerged in under any circumstances, and have that where everybody knows where it is. Really powerful stuff.
I mean, Bobby, right. You know what's coming is to go back to that conversation with Max on the AI agent kind of thing is we're going to get our IFUs, we're going to get our tray inventories to a place that Decon tech can say, hey, chat, I've got a minor tray that's got this little random rangure in here that I've never seen. What am I supposed to do with it? And then that audio chat's going to look it up, cross-reference, and tell them what the answer is. We're not that far away. Like that seems like kind of crazy Jetson stuff, but everything is moving so rapidly now. The potential for that is already out there. Like you can already ask ChatGPT that stuff if it has your IFUs and it has your inventory. We just got to integrate it at the point of use. It's going to be crazy town. So yeah. Buckle up.
Yeah, not far away. And the computer vision side of it's accelerating fast too. So you might not even have to ask it about it. Just say, hey, look at this and tell me what it is and what do I need to do with it? So yeah, lots of things coming, not necessarily to take our place, but to augment the way that we do our work safer, better, every instrument, every time. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Beyond Clean and our final one for this season of season 28, Planet Decontamination. It's been a bit of a whirlwind kind of cruising through here, but we're we're looking forward to next season already here in about a month or so, when we're going to get back together and talk about tray assembly after those instruments come through the other side and explore that planet. We look forward to talking to you again soon. We'll wrap this season the way we always do here at Beyond Clean. On behalf of Hank, myself, and the whole team at Beyond Clean, keep fighting dirty.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.